So whatever everyone says, just remember. Okay, we are live.
Would you like me to admit?
Yeah, let's go ahead and admit so we can start renaming people. All right, welcome everyone. As people are getting ready, we are live on the FASEB YouTube. We're so excited that you're here. And if you could help us out, there was a little bit of a snafu. You may have gotten an email with a nicely linked hyperlink, but that's actually my personal registration link for this roundtable. So you will be coming named as me. So if you could help us out and rename yourself with your name, that would help us a lot, but we will be sure to do that as needed. We are so excited to have everyone. We're going to give a couple minutes for everyone to join. And I will likely repeat this housekeeping message once again. All right, welcome everyone. I know we're a minute before the hour. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll get started here just a bit. If you can check your name, that would help us out a lot because several of you may have been clicking the link that I distributed earlier this morning, but actually that's my personal registration link. So you would be coming in as me. So if you could help us out and rename yourself by clicking the three dots up the top right and rename yourself with your appropriate name. All right. People are joining. We're so excited to have you. I see so many of my name. All right, Lou and Frank, I know you guys are going to kick us off early. Let's give it about another minute or so, and then I'll pass it over to you. All right, welcome everyone who's just joining. We will get started here in just a bit. All right, I think because we have such a packed agenda, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the 2021 FASEB Virtual Shared Research Resources Roundtable. We are so excited that you're here. My name is Naomi Harlem-Bacchus. I'm the one that has been sending you all of those flurry of emails, including the one this morning that gave you the Zoom link that was actually my personal registration link. So if you clicked that to log into this meeting, you will be named me. So if you could help us out and rename yourself with your appropriate name by clicking the three dots on the top right and renaming yourself, that would help us out a lot, but we will get to it as we can. So thank you so much for joining. Please remember to mute your mic just for background noises, any feedback that we may be getting. And if you see yourself being renamed once again with a number in front of your name, don't worry, that's just to help us with the breakout rooms later this afternoon. So thank you again. I think we are ready to get started. I will now turn it over to Dr. Lou Justimet, FASEB's president.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first annual FASEB Shared Research Resources Virtual Roundtable. Yes, my name is Lou Justimet. I'm currently serving as president of FASEB, and we are very excited to convene a diverse group of individuals and who represent a diverse range of perspectives to discuss what we think is an extremely important and oftentimes underappreciated topic, which is shared resources. All of us here today recognize the power of core facilities and their important role in the biomedical research enterprise. And really the question we have in front of us is, how do we harness these resources to meet the needs of a 21st century research enterprise? We hope that today will be the start of many conversations on this issue. Certainly our task force has done a lot of important work leading up to this point, and we want to thank them for their effort. As this event, it was really an opportunity to listen to diverse perspectives, to share suggestions, and it's an opportunity to learn from one another. The first half of this event is being live streamed on our FASEB YouTube channel, and I want to thank everyone who's joined us online. The second half of this event will be closed to the public, as we will enter into more deliberative topics for discussion. And at this point, I want to turn it over to Frank Krause, who's FASEB's Executive Director and CEO. Frank?
Thanks, Lou, and my thanks to everyone participating here today. Thanks for taking the time to be with us. As Lou has said, FASEB has long advocated for shared research resources, and many of you may be familiar with the 2017 report on maximizing shared research resources that was produced by our Shared Research Resources Subcommittee. Recognizing the importance from that work, over the last 18 months, the FASEB board decided this really needed even more focus and formed a dedicated task force for that purpose. That task force began working in the summer of 2020 and has been meeting twice a month, sometimes every week, to identify the gaps in the field and discuss potential policy solutions. I know Lou already thanked the task force, but I will thank you all again. Your commitment to this work and dedication to advancing core facilities has really been impressive. And on behalf of the Federation's member societies, we thank them for their service to the community. The task force's final report was completed and approved by the FASEB board in March of this year. And we look forward to using this report and really helping to advance this work, along with creating and supporting additional resources and advocacy to improve the recognition and sustainability of shared resources. So with that, let me turn it over to one of our experts in this area and a co-chair of the task force, Dr. Sheena Mache. She has been working with FASEB for many, many years on this issue, and we were thrilled that she agreed to co-chair this work. Sheena?
Thank you, Frank. I'm Sheena Mache. I'm Associate Professor of Pathology at NYU Langone and Senior Director of the Division of Advanced Research Resources at the NYU School of Medicine. It has been a wonderful experience working with the FASEB Shared Research Resource Task Force, and we appreciate FASEB investing the time and resources to this issue and engaging all of us here today in this conversation. For we all play a role, funding agencies and partners who identify opportunities and provide financial support, scientists who embrace team science, core scientists who personify the ethics of collaborative sharing, and committed institutions and policies that make it happen. As Frank mentioned, the task force's final report that you will be hearing more about today includes recommendations for institutions and funding agencies and potential steps that we as stakeholders, including FASEB, could implement to advance shared research resources to the next level. So much work has been done, to date, and we thank our NIH partners, ORIP and NCI and NIGMS, as well as NSF and DOE, who have really taken the lead. But the goal is, we feel like we can do more. So the goal of this event is to be as interactive and collaborative as possible. And we'll start by listening to the members of the task force present the various themes and recommendations provided in the final report. And then we'd like a chance to hear from you, our audience. We will break up into smaller groups to share best practices, explore successful strategies, and discuss the challenges that prohibit us from achieving success in this field. As Lou noted at the beginning, this portion of the meeting will be closed to the public. For those that are here with us today, as noted in the agenda and the emails you received from Naomi leading up to this event, each breakout group will focus on one specific topic. These topics range from institutional oversight to regional partnerships to developing metrics for success. We hope you all had a chance to indicate which groups you'd like to participate in. While we try to meet everyone's preferences to the best of our ability, to ensure that we have an equal amount of people in each group, you might have been assigned elsewhere. But to broaden the participation and give everyone a chance to talk about more than just one topic, we'll be doing a second round of the breakout group discussions. This will give us a chance to meet different people as well. We very much appreciate everyone's participation in this event today and ask for your patience should there be any technical difficulties or logistical lags. Because we're on a tight schedule, we also kindly ask that you are respectful of the time, and if you're speaking, to try and keep your answers as brief as possible to ensure that others have a chance to share. And remember to make use of the raise hand function as well as the chat. We have several FASEB staff members that will be helping us monitor both of these. I'd like to mention one final item before we officially kick off the event, and that is the policy paper that the task force recently wrote. In addition to the final report, this was about the need to establish a national strategy for shared research resources. The paper is currently available as a preprint, and Naomi will share a link with you in the chat now. My colleagues will discuss this in a bit more detail, but please read, provide comments, and spread the word. And now, before we get started, we'd like to understand who everyone is in our audience today. In just a few moments, you'll be seeing a poll pop up on your Zoom screen. To the best of your ability, please indicate what your role and occupation is, and Naomi will share the results momentarily.
Lots of votes coming in. Thank you, everyone. Just give it a few more seconds. We have a lot of participants, so I want to make sure that we get as many people as possible. A few more seconds if you can put in your vote. And okay, I'll go ahead and end the poll now, and you should be seeing the results now.
Wow. So based on these results, we have a very diverse population participating today, and we thank you all for your participation. It helps us understand who our audience is and illustrates the diversity. So thank you. I will now turn it over to Dr. Nick Ambulos, the other co-chair of the FASEB task force, and he will kick us off on the presentations by providing an overview of our final report.
Thank you, Sheena. Good afternoon. I'm Nick Ambulos. I'm professor of microbiology and immunology at the University of Maryland School of Medicine, where I also serve as the director of our Center for Innovative Biomedical Resources, or as we call it, CYBR, which consolidates most of our core laboratories in contiguous space. Next slide, please. First, I'd like to acknowledge the members of this task force. They represent broad institutions and organizations from across the country. They bring collectively a diverse expertise, and they share one important quality: their passion for the work that they do as part of a shared research resource environment. And I want to thank them for being collaborators with us on this large effort. Next slide. My co-chair, Sheena Miche, led a FASEB Shared Research Resource Subcommittee that published Maximizing Shared Research Resources report in 2017. Many of you may be familiar with that. This well-received report targeted a wide range of stakeholders, from institutions and federal agencies to individual cores. The most frequent question posed by stakeholders was, what's next? How do we implement this? Next slide. As Frank Krause mentioned earlier, FASEB approved establishment of this task force with the goal of developing a framework and implementation plan for shared research resources, including identifying barriers and opportunities for policy change. We did have a rather compressed timeline. However, our task force members rose to the challenge. The findings outlined in this report will be presented in more detail today. Next slide. Like the previous report, the current report targets a broad audience. We attempt to provide a roadmap to help stakeholders facilitate enhancements of shared research resources. We hope that we've addressed the many challenges and identified key opportunities that can significantly impact shared research resources and accelerate the pace of biomedical research. Next slide, please. This is how we have organized the report. We start with our executive summary. The report consists of 4 key sections: regional, institutional, and national strategies, the role of stakeholders and funding agencies, institutional responsibilities and strategies for advancements of shared research resources, and strategies for shared research resources. These 4 sections will be discussed in succinct detail in a few moments. We then summarize the report with a lengthy list of summary tables of recommendations that we have made and at which level these recommendations can be addressed. This is an example from the section on regional, institutional, and national strategies. And it also even provides a reference for the page in the report where this topic is discussed. Next slide. In addition to this report, as Sheena made reference to a short time ago, we've also published online a policy brief that outlines a series of bolder recommendations. These again will be discussed, and we welcome your comments and suggestions. Our hope is to develop a mechanism to better integrate shared research resources with the national priorities that our funding agencies work diligently to address. Last slide, please. Today's roundtable session was developed with the following goals in mind. First, this is an opportunity for the task force to share this report with a distinguished group of key stakeholders across many diverse organizations. Second, we ask you to critique our report and our recommendations and provide insight that we may not have considered. Third, to use this forum to begin ongoing conversations about development of policies and best practices that will best advance and sustain shared research resources for years to come. With this roundtable discussion, our work isn't concluding. This represents one major step forward and will set the stage for the next task force. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Phil Hochberger and Sarah Bowen.
Thanks, Nick, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm a member of the task force, and it's my pleasure to share with you the recommendations on Section 1, Regional, Institutional, and National Strategies. Next slide, please. This is a synopsis on the left-hand side of the regional and institutional aspects. Key among our recommendations was to develop shared research resources at the regional level to meet the growing need of communities, especially those who have been not able to access shared resources in the past, and thus allowing equitable access. This includes early and mid-career scientists and historically underfunded and underrepresented minority researchers. In addition, we are recommending developing incentives to improve the efficiency and the sustainability of shared research resources through various funding infrastructure opportunities and reduce duplication within institutions of their shared resources. And that is, of course, a practice that many of the leading institutions have already done, but we'd like to get more in line with that. The next slide shows at the national level strategies that we're recommending. And this would include funding mechanisms that address the needs of institutions across a range of capabilities and technical sophistication. This, of course, reflects the fact that not all research institutions have all the instrumentation that they need. They don't have the faculty and staff development programs that they would benefit from, nor the infrastructure itself. And so even at the national level, these are focused on institutional needs, but can be handled, I think, by recommending policy at the national level. Secondly, prioritize principles of research rigor, reproducible, and transparency. This is something that shared research resources offer a unique perspective in that their role across the institution could be a leading voice in how to address these principles. And then finally, raise awareness and leverage existing policies at both the NSF and the NIH, where your voice will have an impact on our institutions. The next slide shows an example of an existing regional partnership. I'm going to show you several that could serve as models for future planning. Here is one in Chicago, the Open Access Initiative, one that I brokered a number of years ago, as a memorandum of understanding that condones and encourages open access to research core facilities by researchers at each partner, thus expanding what is available to them. This means that they're treated the same in terms of cost, and that the faculty can decide for themselves where to spend their precious research dollars at the institution. That MOU was renewed annually from 2015 to 17 and has been so successful that the board that oversees it decided that renewal every 3 years would be sufficient, and it has now been extended through 2023. The next slide shows 4 other examples of regional partnerships. The 2 on top are cancer center driven. The one on the upper left is in San Diego, and the one on the upper right in the mid-Atlantic states. Again, 4 cancer centers in the DC area and Baltimore area. And on the bottom are 2 state examples of regional shared partnerships. The state of Virginia involving 7 universities, and the state of Georgia 8. The next slide, please. Now, other examples of regional partnerships that already exist are the funded Clinical and Translational Science Award. There are regional consortia across, for example, in Chicago, where I am, the 3 medical centers here are part of a consortium of CTSA-funded institutions. And in blue dots are all the individual funded ones, but the red stars are located in places where there are regional consortium. And many of these involve shared research resources in the clinical regime. But these are existing examples that we could use as models. The next slide. Now, at the national level, you're all familiar, I'm sure, with the Department of Energy funded national labs. They are examples of facilities that are available nationwide to researchers. And we're going to hone in to the one in Argonne in the Chicago area, the one I'm most familiar with, on the next slide. And an example there is the Advanced Photon Source, a national resource that's used by 15 different collaboration teams. Northwestern, this is one of 2 that we have, one in the Life Sciences Collaborative Access Team. Northwestern is the lead with its partners, Michigan State, the Van Ardel Institute, Vanderbilt, Wisconsin-Madison, and Champaign-Urbana. there is also a material science team that we lead at this location. And so these are X-ray crystallographic labs that do both biological molecules, macromolecules like proteins and nucleic acids, and provide high-resolution imaging, as well as material science. Another example at the national level are the NIH and NSF-funded cryo-EM centers. Again, fairly recent programs, but examples of these federal agencies recognizing the need at the national level to be able to provide resources that are just too they're cost prohibitive, frankly, for individual institutions, and so the idea of sharing. And these are excellent examples, but they're few and far between. And so we're recommending expanding this kind of approach to regional national centers. And as a last thought, I want to raise the prospect that there's opportunity for international approaches to this. I sit as co-chair of Eurobioimaging, which is the imaging facilities throughout Europe at the national level, and Global Bioimaging, an effort on the imaging side to get countries across the world to work together in facilities and staffing them and providing resources, especially to the underserved areas. So with that, I'm now going to pass the baton to Sarah Bowen, who will cover section 2 of our report.
Thank you, Phil. I'm Sarah Bowen from Barrow Neurological Institute at St. Joseph's Hospital and Medical Center in Phoenix, Arizona. I will present the overview for section 2, the role of stakeholders and funding agencies. Next slide, please. Because SRRs foster collaboration, reduce waste spending, create checks for rigorous science, and act as training grounds for new talent, the overarching goal is to ensure SRR's success so they can continue moving science forward. To that end, a number of stakeholders have roles to play, including institutions, professional societies such as FASEB, ABRF, and ISBR, nonprofits, and private entities. Together, the stakeholders can streamline processes, revise rules, implement thoughtful regulations, and develop global approaches. All this adds up to facilitate greater regional and national sharing, leading to bigger and faster scientific breakthroughs. Next slide, please. Collectively, stakeholders can work in concert as team players to improve models for navigating inter-entity contracting MOUs and MTAs. A contemporary operating model of this is the Cooperative Human Tissue Network, which is an NCI-funded nationwide network for tissue collection. Each region of the US is managed by a single person who works with PIs in that region and collection centers throughout the country to proactively decide when and how to collect tissue. The CHTN's informatics system makes it possible for them to seamlessly communicate across the whole network, including among divisions. Stakeholders can also remove barriers for sharing. One example is Smart IRB, which is an NIH CTSA funded initiative. It's not an IRB, but rather it's a platform that offers a master IRB reliance agreement, meaning it provides a central process for multi-site trials to initiate studies through a single IRB review rather than each individual site's IRB, effectively reducing redundancies. And finally, stakeholders can manage indirect costs. Especially at the institutional level, we need to ensure that cores are appropriately supported in the long term for greatest impact of capital investments. Next slide, please. Funding agencies are uniquely poised to lead our innovation. As a task force, we have mapped out areas that will create the greatest impact towards supporting SRRs. Funding agencies can create opportunities that reward efficiency and reduce redundancy. Funding agencies can integrate incentives to train the SRR workforce. Funding agencies can sustain investments for SRR infrastructure. And finally, funding agencies can expand funding opportunities for maintaining SRR instrumentation and function. All of these aims can be implemented successfully by revisions to existing or development of new opportunities and programs. I will go through each of these aspects and provide examples of how funding agencies can facilitate improved resource sharing on the next slide. Funding agencies can help reward efficiency and reduce redundancy Funding programs could incorporate the use of SRRs by explicitly rewarding proposals and programs that take advantage of the SRRs available to them in their institutions and regions. Additionally, funding agencies could require inventories and justifications for funding, especially for expensive, difficult to maintain equipment. And the last example I'll mention is that funding agencies could provide targeted funding for data tracking. Core facilities generate a lot of data, and implementing a streamlined mechanism that can help track all that information will not only enhance science collaboration, but also help maximize current resources. The Comprehensive Cancer Center designation incorporates a number of these concepts, including the chance for applicants to pause and thoughtfully list how they are using SRRs to maximize their research efforts and resources. Next. Funding agencies can integrate incentives to train the SRR workforce. One example the task force outlines in our report is for NIH to adapt the R50 mechanism for SRR scientists. Currently, this opportunity is exclusive to NCI. If we could expand this opportunity to all ICs and provide both salary support and protected time for scientists who want to pursue research within the context of another existing research program, this will help support career continuity of core facility managers and staff, the people who are vital to sustaining US biomedical research success. Another area that could be improved is R, F, and T grants. The task force recommends funding agencies expand opportunities for R, F, and T grants to include SRR student, staff, and support. Currently, this type of support is not available on these grants. If we are to train the next generation, we need to ensure federal support for the trainees in our core facilities who provide the expertise and access to critical scientific resources. And finally, funding agencies could provide internship opportunities in SRRs. In a best case scenario, paid internship opportunities will help increase the equity of upcoming talent. Next. Funding agencies can help to sustain investments in SRR infrastructure. The task force recommends expanding already existing programs so that institutions can keep up with research demand and maintain their ability to be flexible. Some of the federal programs that we recommend strengthening include the NSF Major Instrumentation Program and the NIH G20 and C06 grant mechanisms. These two mechanisms provide specific support for facility infrastructure, including construction and renovation. And finally, the task force recommends expanding funding opportunities for maintaining SRRs, including support for instrument upgrades, support for instrument repairs, and support for staff retention programs. Core facilities not only need opportunities to acquire pieces of equipment, but also federal support for things that keep facilities running smoothly and efficiently each day. Thank you for your participation in today's roundtable. And with that, I will pass my time to Susan Main to continue our overview.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'm Susan Main from Vanderbilt University Medical Center, and I'm going to focus today on the next slide on institutional responsibilities and the recommendations from our task force. But we hope that you'll see that the material that my colleague Justine Kagenyi will present on strategies for shared research resources is tightly linked to this topic and concept, and there's a lot of integration and overlapping. Next slide, please. So Phil and Sarah have actually done a great job to talk about partnerships and some of the tools that are available and platforms that are out there to support those. So I won't spend more time on that. In addition, Justine is going to spend time on metrics in her conversation with you today. So I will be focusing on some other aspects: institutional oversight, management evaluation, and staff professional development. Next slide. So the task force report encourages institutions to recognize and leverage the integral value of shared research resources and to make those connections between the SRRs and programs and funding sources so that there's intentional leveraging of all of these resources, both the shared resource or cores, as we sometimes call them, as well as the sources of funding that can support them and the investigators that use them. So we try to emphasize in our report the collaborative engagement of key stakeholders, and then make sure that we set expectations as institutions through value statements or other expressions of the importance of shared research resources to the organization. So I offer here to you an example of what we're doing at VUMC. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we've been on a process of a really reorganization of our institution after we separated from Vanderbilt University. And as part of that, we have developed what we call our strategic directions, which have been winnowed down to 3 essential concepts: discover, learn, and share, designed for patient and families, as we are a healthcare organization, as well as a research institution, but then all anchored and linked by making diversity and inclusion intentional. So these concepts then have been built out over the last few years to provide a set of guideposts around how we develop our research portfolio to align with these general concepts, and how the new institute centers, initiatives, and partnerships that we develop can further advance those strategic directions. Very much a part of this, and intentionally called out in our strategic directions, are how shared research resources can enhance institutionally programs across all disciplines, can enable the transparency of data and data sets and methods, and encourage reproducible research. We call for development of new shared research resources that will support not just local, more parochial needs in a given area or department, but are really trans-institutional in their impact, and support that framework. We also call for development of new shared research resources that can enable co-registration and mining of all forms of data. We are a healthcare organization. We have massive amounts of clinical data that can be such a great resource for the development of new discoveries if we can find ways to leverage and use it in specific research initiatives. And so that's something we've been dedicated to. We also call for shared research resources to be essential to accessing clinical specimens, which in a way is another form of data. Next slide, please. So another concept or recommendation that our task force has put forth to you in our report is the need to create an institution-wide shared research resource advisory committee. I offer you an example of the structure we have at VUMC, but this could really be something that is happening anywhere. At VUMC, we have what we call an institutional shared resource oversight committee. And it is supported and informed by our executive leadership, who are all ex officio members of that committee, and incorporates leadership from our research centers and our research community, as well as from the research cores themselves. And the idea is to have a broad base of input and guidance for the way that we support and develop shared resources at VUMC. And so the other piece of that committee that we think is important is that it incorporates administration. And so we have people who are experts in areas that are not necessarily scientific, but who understand policy and financial imperatives that are associated with operating core facilities. And they are part of that committee process. And that is linked tightly to individual shared resource oversight committees. We call them cores at VUMC. And those committees sort of report back to our institutional group, as well as up and down through the various research community stakeholders and through the core facility itself. I think importantly, in general, taking a step back to what our report advises, is these committees can be a great tool for both advancing awareness of shared research resources, but also for looking at how funds are flowing through and to shared research resources, and how those investments in both research programs and shared research resources can be aligned and integrated for a greater synergy and a wider impact over time. Next slide, please. Another recommendation out of our report is that institutions would establish best practices and laboratory standards for effective management and evaluation of shared research resources. So there are a lot of common best practices. Many of you may be familiar with these and are incorporating them into your own areas. And I think ABRF, the Association for Biomolecular Resource Facilities, is a great resource for learning more about some of these. But our recommendations include ensuring that there's a centralized billing and reporting system, that there are data management resources and a plan in place for that. There are independent and equitable space allocation plans for shared research resources. I think this is one where a lot of institutions struggle to make that an intentional part of how shared research resources are supported. Ensure that there's strategic communication to foster that culture. And that goes back to the discussion about the Oversight Committee, where that tool can be one way to raise awareness. And I think these things are all integrated, so they don't exist in isolation, but we hope that they would be worked together and integrated as a program for advancing shared research resources. So importantly too, a system for managing and tracking metrics of success. And I know Justine is going to talk a little bit more about that. And then policies and procedures around business plans, as well as internal and external evaluation for shared research resources. And then I think another piece, which I'll talk about on the next slide, will be about professional development. Oh, I'm sorry, it will be a later slide, excuse me. But I offer here just a couple of items from VUMC, just to give you a sense of the types of tools and procedures that we have in place that are accessible to all of our shared research resource directors and managers, so that they can actually operate in the best possible way. And we work closely with them always. This rigor, reproducibility, and transparency checklist for cores is actually something that was developed through and with the ABRF. And so that's very important to recognize how working with a professional organization can actually make a difference in your organization. We've been very active with ABRF, and we have found it to be a great way to share and learn more about best practices and to incorporate those in our culture at VUMC. Next slide, please. So another recommendation out of the report is that there should be prioritization and incorporation of shared research resource needs into the faculty recruitment process. So this can be a little daunting, but over the years, and I will emphasize that it has been over years, to incorporate and develop this culture of collaboration, where at VUMC, we have worked very hard to ensure that new faculty recruits are both supported, but also integrated into our concept of shared research resources. So when we offer startup packages to new faculty, we ensure that any funding for new equipment will be going toward supporting core technology as appropriate. Obviously, there are many types of equipment that may not be suitable for a shared research resource model. But when it does align, what we do is make those investments into the shared research resource as a way of promoting the faculty recruitment. Our matching funds to new grants follow a similar principle, where when we are giving money for equipment to a new grant, it will be part of a core resource management plan. When we support our research centers, we expect that they will partner with us in developing and sustaining shared resources as part of the investments that we are working with them to achieve. We have developed a very strong and centralized core administrative apparatus that I think is very responsive to the needs of our shared research resources and tightly integrated with our research strategy and our research programs. And we try to make that collaborative as well. So it's not just seen as a nameless, faceless bureaucracy across the institution. We have developed a standardized approach to the shared equipment program out of NIH, the S10 program. And we work hard to ensure that those awards go to cores or shared research resources, and that we are then supporting those new equipment awards in ways that will ensure their sustainability over time and their access by multiple research programs. We have a competitive internal development process where we can provide grants and small pilot project funding for cores. And we do have a professional career track that we have developed at VUMC, which I will talk about more on the next slide. So this was another big recommendation out of the FASEB report, that we need to recognize and highlight the unique contributions of shared research resources, directors, and staff. And importantly, we included staff in that recognition because I think it's very often the case that staff sometimes come second to faculty at the institutional level when we're looking at how to advance their development. So I offer to you an example of a staff track that we have developed at VUMC over the course of more than 10 years, and most recently just added the scientific research core specialist role. And this is a process of collaboration with our human resources department, as well as with our research center leadership and our executive research leadership, to ensure that we're covering as many bases as possible. We do not actually have a great program at VUMC for faculty development in regard to those who are leaders in core facility management and direction. There are organizations that have done a great job with this, and NYU and Northwestern are both organizations that have strong programs for faculty recognition and professional development. But I think we do all have future directions, and our report from FASEB calls this out to ensure that we're considering the needs to develop diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of our programs to advance professional development across all roles related to core facilities, shared research resources. I think we all need to be intentional about advancing diversity in our workforce and ensuring equity in our recruiting and our professional development efforts. And then to being inclusive in terms of planning and implementing those new programs for professional development, so that we're considering all viewpoints and needs. And I think with that, I will be handing it over to Justine to talk about the next section. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you all for joining us today. It's been a privilege and honor to serve on this task force with this talented group of individuals that do their best work every day in support of our shared goals for shared research resources. I want to start my segment by going over some key concepts from the report and end with some practical examples and approaches from our imaging center, the University of Kansas Medical Center. Next slide. Perhaps you've heard this expression that says, you've seen one core, and a core is another name we use for shared research resources. Even within the same institution or even within the same department where cores are embedded, shared research facilities might look or function differently. And so we must be careful not to prescribe one-size-fits-all solution, as Nick and several others here have already mentioned, when it comes to strategy and positioning for shared research resources for success. One thing to note, though, is that stakeholders for shared research resources remain largely similar across institutions and disciplines. Our task force recommends focusing on interrelationships between the shared research resources and its stakeholders as a means to understand the needs, develop strategies and best practices to address these needs and add value and maximize outcomes and impact of shared research resources. Next slide, please. Most of us here have seen this picture from our report illustrating the relationships between an SRR and its stakeholders. These relationships fall into three broad categories. Some are operational in nature, and these pertain to the day-to-day operational and transactional things that cores do. We have integrative or influencer relationships, and these pertains to support units and systems to ensure vibrancy, operational efficiency, and compliance, among many other things for shared research resources. And then we have the strategic relationships that shape and form the overall direction of the SRR. It is important that SRRs and its stakeholders understand and leverage these relationships within the research ecosystem for maximum impact. Next slide, please. Again, to do a recap of what we've just talked about, it's important to have a good understanding of SRR and stakeholders and their very unique needs in order for the SRRs to align and leverage these relationships and available resources to address these unique needs. And I keep remembering this expression. Someone once said, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And this is where we really talk about metrics, as Susan just mentioned in her previous presentation. SRR should partner with each stakeholder to develop metrics that are unique and meaningful to each stakeholder, and then adopt best practices and a cycle of continuous improvement to increase value to the various stakeholders. Next slide, please. This is just a simple illustration of the contextual framework in which an SRR can align and exploit stakeholder relationships to meet needs and add value. It illustrates an example from each of the relationships we just mentioned below, the operational, the influence, and the strategic relationships. But in the interest of time, I'm not going to go over all the examples here. I'll just focus on the last example, which is a strategic relationship between the SRR and the Vice Chancellor's office. And these are known by different names at different institutions. At our institution, we're a medical center, so we call it the Vice Chancellor's Office for Research. And our office makes strategic investments into SRRs and expects the SRR to contribute fully to the institutional goals. And in most cases, you want to assume that SRR, the institution would have included the SRR in its broad strategic plan, as others have mentioned here. And Susan just really highlighted the need to include shared research resources in institutional plans and strategies. And so in this example, the SRR has to position itself in turn to meet these goals as set forth and remain a good steward of institutional investments. These goals should be well defined and metrics for success articulated. And this goes both ways. The SRR has to partner with these various stakeholders to understand those unique needs, as we've mentioned, articulate the value that it brings to its holders, and then work on metrics to track and measure success. And as we've said here, if you really can't measure it, you cannot improve it. Next slide, please. I will now share some examples of how our imaging center has positioned itself to serve as a key resource, meet stakeholder needs, and add value to the research enterprise at our institution. We are the Hoagland Biomedical Imaging Center, and we serve as a key imaging resource for imaging endeavors at the University of Kansas Medical Center and in the region. We have capabilities for whole body imaging in humans and small animal models. These include magnetic resonance imaging and elastography, magnetoencephalography. We have both a cortical and fetal MEG system, and these are very unique systems that are not found in many places, especially under one roof. And so we have those capabilities, and we have high density EEG capabilities, and most recently, actually through a collaboration, speaking about stakeholder collaborations, with the Department of Internal Medicine. They hired a new faculty, and he wanted to do imaging for lungs. And so we have this new technology that produces xenon gas that you can actually inhale while in the scanner. And so that's a new capability that we recently acquired through our partnership with one of our stakeholders. We serve all KUMC schools. We have the School of Medicine, School of Nursing, School of Health Professions, and all basic and clinical departments. Again, that collaboration that I just mentioned with internal medicine, which is a clinical department, to be able to bring unique capabilities. Also, the MR elastography was a collaboration with that internal medicine department. We also serve as a resource for several NIH-funded centers and programs, including a Clinical and Translational Sciences Award. Phil and Sarah just mentioned some of those aspects, how we collaborate and share resources across regions. We also serve as an Alzheimer's Center. We serve as a key resource for an Alzheimer's Center program, P30 program, a polycystic kidney disease, among many others, as I've highlighted here. We also serve as the regional resource for several academic institutions and independent research institutes in the area, as well as support many industry clinical trials. Our center's work is focused on exploiting available resources, and this is important, and capabilities to support team science, and involves collaboration, strategic alliances, and partnerships with all stakeholders, including facility users, institutional leadership, sponsors, regional partners to enable discovery and maximize scientific output. We have a team of faculty and staff scientists that assist investigators with various aspects of designing and conducting studies, as well as developing novel imaging methods. Next slide, please. Here is an illustration of how we have partnered with our various stakeholders and partners to meet their needs. As you can tell, this is a fairly busy picture, and so we are really doing a lot of work beyond the traditional function of an image of a core service as SRR. And so we go over and above to add value and leverage all our resources to meet our stakeholder needs. We have leveraged the relationships, opportunities, and available funding to return value and have a broader impact to KUMC and beyond. I will not go over each one of these in detail, but I want to focus on just a few examples just for emphasis. Next slide, please. So our primary goal as an imaging center is to support our users and providing access to state-of-the-art imaging and instrumentation and in-house expertise. But we have positioned ourselves as good stewards of the institution's investments by consolidating all our imaging under one roof and avoiding resource duplication. And Phil just mentioned this, just really how cores can position themselves to avoid duplication and be good stewards. So we've done that by having all our imaging under one roof, and all these capabilities that I just mentioned, some of which could have resided in a department or in a PI's lab, but by bringing them all under one roof, it improves efficiency, it improves access, and planning becomes a lot more easier and shaping the direction. We also have doing some non-traditional work. We are doing a lot of community engagement, which is typically, you wouldn't, not a typical expectation of something that you find in core facilities doing. Our faculty are very and core scientists are proactive in mentoring high school students and undergraduate students. We also provide externship opportunities to science teachers from rural Kansas. We are a medical center and we are funded by public dollars. And so we really do our part to be able to have a meaningful impact to the lives of Kansans. We are making efforts to address diversity, equity, and inclusion. Susan just mentioned this in her presentation. And we endeavor to do our part to improve the pipeline for underrepresented groups in STEM while promoting careers in shared research resources. And perhaps most important, this is something we have not really thought about as core facilities, but we are beginning to think about it because of how we are uniquely positioned, our critical role in supporting team science. We are beginning to ask ourselves if there are some opportunities to work with our users in designing imaging studies that are more inclusive of the communities and populations that we serve. This is still a work in progress. KUMC has made a lot of strides in improving diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just in staffing, not just in access. We're also beginning to take that a step further to how we conduct and design studies to make them more inclusive. And core facilities are uniquely positioned because of how they serve several users from various walks of life and backgrounds and professional status to be able to have a meaningful impact on that. So we've just started those efforts and we're hoping we can make a difference in that area. And as you can tell, this is all a lot of work and requires support and resources, and we endeavor to work with our stakeholders and key partners to prioritize and add the activities, focus on the activities that bring value. We can't do it all, but with partnership from our stakeholders and identifying key activities and that we think are critical and impactful, we're able to leverage some of the resources and go out on a limb to find more. We've been able to leverage some philanthropy dollars to support some of these initiatives. On the next slide, I just want to leave you with a picture of some of the metrics that we have used to assess our progress. You've seen this picture from our report, but I just wanted to bring it here and just show you how some of the commonly used metrics for assessing core success. And as a reminder, metrics should be designed to be meaningful to each stakeholder, each of the shared research resources, and there should be an effort to partner with each stakeholder to identify metrics that are meaningful to them and address their needs. And with that, I want to thank you for your time, and I will now turn it over to Nick. Thank you.
Thank you, Justine. Now that we've had a chance to share details from the task force's report, we'd like to transition to our smaller group discussions. This is an opportunity to hear from you, the participants, and expand upon the various topics mentioned throughout the final report. Thank you to everyone for contacting Naomi and indicating which breakout room you would like to participate in. As a refresher, Naomi will now show on the screen the list of rooms and topics each group will discuss. As you can see, there are 7 groups and 7 topics. Once everyone arrives in their assigned rooms, if everyone could please write your name and your affiliation in the chat box, that will be very helpful since we do not have enough time in each session to go around and introduce each person. We'd like to focus the short time we have together on meaningful discussion. Each group will have a discussion guide and a note taker, and this will help guide the conversation and keep track of everyone's comments. If you get lost or have a question, FASEB staff will be scattered throughout all the different rooms and are available to help you locate your way to the correct room. Naomi will also be staying here in the main room in case anybody gets lost or runs into any difficulties. We will do the first round of breakout rooms here in just a few minutes, and then Naomi will bring everyone back to the main room. We'll take a 5-minute break, and then after the break, we will begin round 2 of the breakouts. With that, Naomi, I believe we are ready to get started.
Wonderful. I am in the process of assigning everyone. If you could just give me 1 second, and then I will send you off to your rooms and you will discuss wonderful, wonderful things. A lot of people, which I am so excited about. So thank you for your patience. Last room.
So I'm anxiously awaiting to get beamed up.
Yes. Almost finished. In just a few seconds, you should be getting a notification to join your specific breakout room, and I will open the rooms now.